My lover stands on golden sands and watches ships that go sailing somewhere.
All right. Welcome back to Kill a Mockingbird. And I realized after chapter 3 we didn't do the reader's log, so let's go back and do the reader's log for chapter 3. Um, I don't expect you to take a ton of time on this, but just a little bit. Um, so let's go here um, and add in how Scout beats up Walter. Then Jem invites Walter for dinner, which is what we call lunch these days. Walter drowns his food in molasses, and Scout kind of freaks out on him. Calpurnia tells Scout she must respect others. Scout gets a lot of advice in this chapter. Scout doesn't want to go to school, so Atticus tells her she must try to climb in another skin and walk around in it. It's a way to teach her tolerance. And empathy, which is when you don't feel sad for someone, you feel sad or like them. You feel like they feel. And then we also have Burris, Ewell, who the other boys are a good contrast to him. Some are poor but proud. Some are born gentlemen. Burris is just downright mean. So, and this goes back to what Scout thought, but he's dirty, he's foul-mouthed. So we got that. In this one, I always visualize. I can see the big cootie when Burris squashes it. That's a visualization. I could have over here some study questions. But I could have how are the Cunninghams different than the Ewells? That would be a good question. And then I also think, something that we can look at in this chapter is what kind of advice does Scout get? From Atticus and Calpurnia. Just stuff. There you go. So, let's look at chapter 4. But before we do, chapter 3 has a writer's journal. You should write for maybe 10 minutes. Explore the topic of social groups the Scout is encountering. How do wealth, status, and education affect someone's social standing? How does this go along with the moral order Scout expects to see? So I think Scout expects that if you are educated and have money, then you're on top of the ladder. But she finds herself at the bottom of the ladder when she has to go eat in the kitchen with the help. Because it's not all about your wealth. It's also about how you treat other people, at least at a certain point. But that's where the status comes from. So, and then education. Little Chuck Little isn't really highly educated. He can't get out of first grade, but he's a nice kid. So that can also change how people view you. All right, let's go into chapter 4. The remainder of my school days were no more auspicious than the first. Indeed, they were an endless project that slowly evolved into a unit in which miles of construction paper and wax crayon were expended by the state of Alabama in its well-meaning but fruitless efforts to teach me group dynamics. What Jim called the Dewey Decimal System was school-wide by the end of my first year, so I had no chance to compare it with other teaching techniques. I could only look around me. Atticus and my uncle, who went to school at home, knew everything. At least what one didn't know, the other did. Furthermore, I couldn't help noticing that my father had served for years in the state legislature, elected each time without opposition, innocent of the adjustments my teachers thought essential to the development of good citizenship. Jim, educated on a half-decimal, half-dunce cap basis, seemed to function effectively alone or in a group, but Jim was a poor example. No tutorial system devised by man could have stopped him from getting at books. As for me, I knew nothing except what I gathered from Time magazine and reading everything I could lay my hands on at home. But as I inched sluggishly along the treadmill of the Macomb County school system, I could not help receiving the impression that I was being cheated out of something. Out of what I knew not, yet I did not believe that 12 years of unrelieved boredom was exactly what the state had in mind for me. Sounds like modern schools. As the year passed, released from school 30 minutes before Jim, who had to stay until 3 o'clock, I ran by the Radley place as fast as I could, not stopping until I reached the safety of our front porch. One afternoon, as I raced by, something caught my eye, and caught it in such a way that I took a deep breath, a long look around, and went back. Two live oaks stood at the edge of the Radley lot. Their roots reached out in the side road and made it bumpy. Something about one of the trees attracted my attention. Some tinfoil was sticking in a knothole just above my eye level, winking at me in the afternoon sun. I stood on tiptoe, hastily looked around once more, reached into the hole, withdrew 2 pieces of chewing gum minus their outer wrappers. My first impulse was to get it into my mouth as quickly as possible, but I remembered where I was. I ran home, and on our front porch I examined my loot. The gum looked fresh. I sniffed it, and it smelled all right. I licked it and waited for a while. When I did not die, I crammed it into my mouth. Wrigley's Double Mint. When Jim came home, he asked me where I got such a wad. I told him I found it. Don't eat things you find, Scout. It wasn't on the ground, it was in a tree. Jim growled. Well, it was, I said. It was sticking in that tree yonder, the one coming from school. Spit it out right now. I spat it out. The tang was fading anyway. I've been chewing it all afternoon. I ain't dead yet, not even sick. Jim stamped his foot. Don't you know you're not supposed to even touch the trees over there? You'll get killed if you do. You touched the house once. That was different. You go gargle. Right now, you hear me? Ain't neither. It'll take the taste out of my mouth. You don't, and I'll tell Calpurnia on you. Rather than risk a tangle with Calpurnia, I did as Jim told me. For some reason, my first year of school had wrought a great change in our relationship. Calpurnia's tyranny, unfairness, and meddling in my business had faded to gentle grumblings of general disapproval. On my part, I went to much trouble sometimes not to provoke her. Summer was on the way. Jem and I awaited it with impatience. Summer was our best season. It was sleeping on the back screen porch in cots or trying to sleep in the treehouse. Summer was everything good to eat. It was 1,000 colors in a parched landscape. But most of all, summer was dill. The authorities released us early the last day of school, and Jem and I walked home together. Reckon old Dale'll be coming tomorrow, I said. Probably day after, said Jem. Mississippi turns him loose a day later. As we came to the live oaks of the Radley place, I raised my finger to point for the 100th time to the knothole where I had found the chewing gum, trying to make Jem believe I had found it there, and found myself pointing at another piece of tinfoil. I see it, Scout, I see. Jem looked around, reached up, and gingerly pocketed a tiny, shining package. We ran home, and on the front porch we looked at a small box patchworked with bits of tinfoil collected from chewing gum wrappers. It was the kind of box wedding rings came in, purple velvet with a minute catch. Jem flicked open the tiny catch. Inside were 2 scrubbed and polished pennies, one on top of the other. Jem examined them. Indian heads, he said. 1906 and Scout. One of them's 1900. These are real old. 1900, I echoed. Say, hush a minute, I'm thinking. Jem, you reckon that somebody's hiding place? Nah, don't anybody much but us pass by there, unless it's some grown persons. Grown folks don't have hiding places. You reckon we ought to keep 'em, Jem? I don't know what we could do, Scout. Who'd we give 'em back to? I know for a fact don't anybody go by there. Cecil goes by the back street and all the way around by town to get home. Cecil Jacobs, who lived at the far end of our street next door to the post office,
walked a total of 1 mile per school day to avoid the Radley place and old Mrs. Henriette Lafayette DuBose. Mrs. DuBose lived 2 doors up the street from us. Neighborhood opinion was unanimous that Mrs. DuBose was the meanest old woman who ever lived. Jim wouldn't go by her place without Atticus beside him. Okay, neighborhood opinion is like Jim and Scout, and sometimes Dill. Okay. What do you reckon we ought to do, Jim? Finders or keepers unless title was proven, plucking an occasional camellia, getting a squirt of hot milk from Miss Maudie Atkinson's cow on a summer day, helping ourselves to someone's scuppernongs was part of our ethical culture. But money was different. Tell you what, said Jim, we'll keep 'em till school starts, then go around and ask anybody if they're theirs. There's some bus childs maybe. He was too taken up with getting out of school today and forgot 'em. These are somebody's, I know that. See how they've been slicked up? They've been saved. Yeah, but why would somebody want to put away chewing gum like that? You know it doesn't last. I don't know, Scout, but these are important to somebody. How's that, Jim? Well, Indian heads. Well, they come from the Indians. They're real strong magic. They make you have good luck. Not like fried chicken when you're not looking for it, but things like long life and good health and passing 6-week tests. These are real valuable to somebody. I'm going to put 'em in my trunk. Before Jim went to his room, he looked for a long time at the Radley place. He seemed to be thinking again. 2 days later, Dill arrived in a blaze of glory. He had ridden the train by himself from Meridian to Macomb Junction. A courtesy title, Macomb Junction was in Abbott County, where he had been taken by Miss Rachel in Macomb's one taxi. He had eaten dinner in the diner. He had seen 2 twins hitched together get off the train in Bay St. Louis and stuck to a story regardless of threats. He had discarded the abominable blue shorts that were buttoned to his shirts and wore real pants with the belt. He was somewhat heavier, no taller, and said he had seen his father. Dill's father was taller than ours. He had a black beard, pointed, and was president of the L&N Railroad. So I brought up here images of Dill Harris. This is from the movie. These are just some pictures of him and Scout. Okay. Sort of what he looks like. I helped the engineer for a while, said Dill, yawning. In a pig's ear you did, Dill. Hush, said Jim. What do we play today? Tom and Sam and Dick, said Dill. Let's go in the front yard. Dill wanted the Rover boys because there were 3 respectable parts. He was clearly tired of being our character man. I'm tired of those, I said. I was tired of playing Tom Rover, who suddenly lost his memory in the middle of a picture show and was out of the script until the end when he was found in Alaska. Make us up one, Jim, I said. I'm tired of making them up. Our first days of freedom, and we were tired. I wondered what the summer would bring. We had strolled in the front yard where Dill stood looking down the street at the dreary face of the Radley place. Ah, smell death, he said. I do. I mean it, he said when I told him to shut up. You mean when someone's dying you can smell it? No, I mean I can smell somebody and tell if they're gonna die. An old lady taught me how. Dill leaned over and sniffed me. Jean, Louise, Finch, you're going to die in 3 days. Dill, if you don't hush, I'll knock you bow-legged. I mean it now. Y'all hush, growled Jim. You act like you believe in hot steams. You act like you don't, I said. What's a hot steam? Asked Dill. Haven't you ever walked along a lonesome road at night and passed by a hot place? Jim asked Dill. A hot steam's somebody who can't get to heaven, just wallows around on lonesome roads, and if you walk through them, when you die, you'll be one too, and you'll go around at night sucking people's breath. How can you keep from passing through one? You can't, said Jim. Sometimes they stretch all the way across the road, but if you have to go through one, you say, Angel bright, life and death, get off the road, don't suck my breath. That keeps them from wrapping around you. Don't you believe a word he says, Dill, I said. Calpurnia says that's nigger talk. Jim scowled darkly at me, but said, well, are we going to play anything or not? Let's roll in the tire, I suggested. Jim sighed. You know I'm too big. You can push. I ran to the backyard and pulled an old car tire from under the house. I slapped it up the front yard. I'm first, I said. I want to go back to Calpurnia said that's nigger talk. Calpurnia is their black helper. And when she says that's nigger talk, that means it's superstitious talk. It's a slang term for that. But it has, just some inherent racist undertones to it. Because if that kind of means anything that a black person says is false or is a stereotype, but Calpurnia is herself black, so she doesn't consider herself there. which goes back to our social classes and education. Calpurnia is more educated, so she doesn't do that, supposedly. Okay. Dill said he ought to be first. He just got here. Jim arbitrated, awarded me first push with an extra time for Dill, and I folded myself inside the tire. Until it happened, I did not realize that Jim was offended by my contradicting him on hot steams, and that he was patiently awaiting an opportunity to reward me. He did by pushing the tire down the sidewalk with all the force of his body. Ground, sky, and houses melted into a mad pallet. My ears throbbed. I was suffocating. I could not put out my hands to stop. They were wedged between my chest and knees. I could only hope that Jim would outrun the tire and me, or that I would be stopped by a bump in the sidewalk. I heard him behind me, chasing and shouting. The tire bumped on gravel, skidded across the road, crashed into a barrier, and popped me like a cork onto the pavement. Dizzy and nauseated, I lay on the cement and shook my head still, pounding my ears to silence, and heard Jim's voice, "Scout, get away from there, come on!" I raised my head and stared at the Radley Place steps in front of me. I froze. "Come on, Scout, don't just lie there," Jim was screaming. "Get up, can't you?" I got to my feet, trembling as I thawed. "Get the tire," Jim hollered. "Bring it with you. Ain't you got any sense at all?" When I was able to navigate, I ran back to them as fast as my shaking knees would carry me. "Why didn't you bring it?" Jim yelled. "Why don't you get it?" I screamed. Jim was silent. "Go on, it ain't far inside the gate. Why, you even touched the house once, remember?" Jim looked at me furiously, could not decline, ran down the sidewalk, treaded water at the gate, then dashed in and retrieved the tire. "See there," Jim was scowling triumphantly. "Nothing to it. I swear, Scout, sometimes you act so much like a girl, it's mortifying." There was more to it than he knew, but I decided not to tell him. She gets called a girl all the time by these boys. Calpurnia appeared in the front door and yelled, "Lemonade time, y'all! You all get in out of the hot sun before you fry alive." Lemonade in the middle of the morning was a summertime ritual. Calpurnia set a pitcher and 3 glasses on the porch, then went about her business. Being out of Jem's good graces did not worry me especially. Lemonade would restore his good humor. Jem gulped down the second glassful and slapped his chest. "I know what we're going to play," he announced. "Something new, something different." "What?" asked Dill. "Boo Radley." Jim's head at times was transparent. He had thought that up to make me understand he wasn't afraid of Radley's in any shape or form, to contrast his own fearless heroism with my cowardice. "Boo Radley, how?" asked Dill. Jim said, "Scout, you can be Mrs. Radley." "I declare if I will. I don't think it's matter," said Dill, still scared. "He can get out at night when we're all asleep," I said. Jim hissed, "Scout, how's he going to know what we're doing? Besides, I don't think he's still there. He died years ago, and they stuffed him up the chimney." Dill said, "Jim, you and me can play, and Scout can watch if she's scared." I was fairly sure Boo Radley was inside that house, but I couldn't prove it, and I felt it best to keep my mouth shut, or I could be accused of believing in hot steams, phenomena I was immune to in the daytime. Jim parceled out our roles. I was Mrs. Radley, and all I had to do was come out and sweep the porch. Dill was old Mr. Radley. He walked up and down the sidewalk and coughed when Jim spoke to him. Jim naturally was Boo. He went under the front steps and shrieked and howled from time to time. As the summer progressed, so did our game. We polished and perfected it, added dialogue and plot until we had manufactured a small play upon which we rang changes every day. Dill was the villain's villain. He could get into any character part assigned to him and appear tall if height was part of the devilry required. He was as good as his worst performance. His worst performance was gothic. I reluctantly played assorted ladies who entered the script. I never thought it as much fun as Tarzan, and I played that summer with more than vague anxiety, despite Jim's assurances that Boo Radley was dead and nothing would get me, with him and Calpurnia there in the daytime and Atticus at home at night. Jim was a born hero. It was a melancholy little drama, woven from bits and scraps of gossip and neighborhood legend. Mrs. Radley had been beautiful until she married Mr. Radley and lost all her money. She also lost most of her teeth, her hair, and her right forefinger. That was Dill's contribution. Boo bit it off one night when he couldn't find any cats and squirrels to eat. She sat in the living room and cried most of the time while Boo slowly whittled away all the furniture in the house. The 3 of us were the boys who got into trouble. I was the probate judge for a change. Dill led Jim away and crammed him beneath the steps, poking him with the brush broom. Jim would reappear as needed in the shapes of the sheriff, assorted townsfolk, and Miss Stephanie Crawford, who had more to say about the Radleys than anyone in Macon. When it was time to play Boo's big scene, Jim would sneak into the house, steal the scissors from the sewing machine drawer when Calpurnia's back was turned, then sit in the swing and cut up newspapers. Dill would walk by, cough at Jim, and Jim would fake a plunge into Dill's thigh. From where I stood, it looked real. When Mr. Nathan Radley passed us on his daily trip to town, we would stand still and silent till he was out of sight, then wonder what he would do to us if he suspected. Our activities halted when any of the neighbors appeared, and once I saw Miss Maudie Atkinson staring across the street at us, her hedge clippers poised in midair. Everybody can see what they're doing, they just don't think that. They're so wrapped up in their game, they don't think people can see them, but it's a small community. One day we were so busy playing chapter 25, book 2 of One Man's Family, we did not see Atticus standing on the sidewalk looking at us, slapping a rolled magazine against his knee. The sun said 12 noon. "What are y'all playing?" he asked. "Nothing," said Jim. Jim's evasion told me our game was a secret, so I kept quiet. "What are you doing with those scissors then? Why are you tearing up that newspaper? If that's today's, I'll tan you." "Nothing. Nothing what?" said Atticus. "Nothing, sir." "Give me those scissors," Atticus said. "They're no things to play with. Does this by any chance have anything to do with the Radleys?" "No, sir," said Jim, reddening. "I hope it doesn't," he said shortly, and went inside the house. "Jim!" "Shut up! He's gone in the living room. He can hear us in there." Oh, now they realize it. Safely in the yard, Dill asked Jim if we could play any more. "I don't know. Atticus didn't say we couldn't." "Jim," I said, "I think Atticus knows it anyway." "No, he don't. If he did, he'd say he did." I was not so sure, but Jim told me I was being a girl. That girls always imagine things. That's why other people hated them so, and if I started behaving like one, I could just go off and find something to play with. "All right, you just keep it up then," I said. "You'll find out." Atticus's arrival was the second reason I wanted to quit the game. The first reason happened the day I rolled into the Radley front yard. Through all the head-shaking, wailing of nausea and Jim yelling, I had heard another sound, so low I could not have heard it from the sidewalk. Someone inside the house was laughing. I love that chapter. The kids are so imaginative, but Scout is kind of getting the clue that Boo Radley's probably watching them. If everybody in the neighborhood can see him, they think they can just stop playing and not run into Boo, but I don't really think that's the case. So let's finish up here. Just looking at Chapter 4 plot summary. So, what do we have? We start off, Scout finds gum in the Radley tree. They find Indian head pennies that are all shined up. Jim has a story about how those are magical. Okay, well. Dill returns, and the kids start playing. The Radley game. They get caught by Atticus. And then we have, of course, the tire scene. This shows you how scared Scout really is. Scout rolls into the Radley yard and is too dizzy to run. She hears someone inside the house laughing at her. So I could do some things here. I could use a prediction. I could predict I think Boo Radley is watching the kids, and they will meet him. You can put any kind of prediction there. If you have a question about the story, you can ask that question, or a connection. I have a connection. There was a haunted house on my friend's paper route.
I'm not going to write how we once pushed him inside the house. That was really mean. So there you go. And the clarify is if your prediction or a question you have are answered or come true, that's what a clarify is for. And then over here, study questions. So what do I have that I could answer from the plot summary? What do the kids find in the tree? What does Scout hear in the Radley yard? Those are questions. And then you have your chapter highlight. All right, see you in chapter 5. Let's go out with a little music.
Do it again. I may say no, 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 no,